In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I analyze an ancestor's death certificate. Watch over my shoulder to see my process so that you can analyze your own ancestor's death certificate and not miss any clues. So stick with me because I'm going to break it all down for you. Hey everyone, if we haven't met before, I'm Lisa with Are You My Cousin? This YouTube channel is dedicated to helping you find your ancestors, grow your family tree, and not get overwhelmed in the process. So if you are searching for your ancestors, you're in the right place. Now in this video, I'm going to be letting you look over my shoulder as I analyze death certificates. And I do want to tell you, I will be sharing examples that are US based. However, if you are researching ancestors outside of the US, stick with me and keep watching, because the strategies that I show you and how I walk through analyzing that death certificate for my US ancestors is actually applicable regardless of what country you might be researching in. The information that you might be picking up could be a little different, but the process is still very, very similar. Now, death certificates, like birth certificates, are actually still fairly modern genealogy records when we think about it, because some states really didn't start requiring the issuance of a death certificate until relatively late. For example, in the state of North Carolina, death certificates, like birth certificates, really were not required to be issued until 1913. And then full compliance really didn't occur until the beginning of the First World War. So that's relatively late in the scheme of some of the genealogy records that we tend to look at, right? So it is important to know when the issuance of death certificates started for the state where your ancestor died. And additionally, you're going to want to know what the privacy laws were as far as giving you access to being able to request a copy of that death certificate. Many states actually limit the access to their death certificates to 50 years after the event has occurred. The easiest thing to do and the quickest thing to do is to actually go to the state's Office of Vital Records and look at their requirements for requesting that death certificate. That's the quickest way to do it, to find out what that state actually requires in the current time. I'll be walking you through a couple examples of death certificates and how I analyze them as we go. So I'm going to turn the camera around, let you look over my shoulder, and we're going to start first with the North Carolina death certificate from the 1920s of Maddie Maddox Howard. Okay, so we are over here on my Ancestry.com tree, and I have pulled up the death certificate for Maddie Howard. Mrs. Maddie Howard, also Maddie Maddox was her maiden name. And so I want to take you step by step through the process so that you can see exactly how I go about analyzing this death certificate and how I can add clues from it to my research plan going forward. So again, this is a death certificate from the state of North Carolina. The first thing I'm looking at, place of death, it was Wake County. This 92 number here, that is actually something the state uses for numbering the counties for their recording purposes. So Wake County is number 92. It is the state of North Carolina. She died in Raleigh, North Carolina at the state hospital. Now, for those of you who don't know, that if I did not know, I would actually go and research that to find out exactly what is the state hospital, or what was the state hospital at the time. And what I would find out is it is what would eventually become known as Dorothea Dix Hospital. It was for mental health. It's a mental health hospital, psychiatric hospital at that time in Raleigh. So that definitely gives me some clues already. I'm thinking about, what was the cause? Why was she there? We have her full name. Now, interesting, they put Mrs. Maddie V. Howard, again, using the address with the state hospital. So this is kind of suspicious to me, right? Because, I just, they're talking about the state hospital. I know that's not where she obviously lived her life, but it gives me some ideas already that I know I need to look at and research more about the state hospital and how people ended up becoming inmates, or as they refer to them, or as patients there. We do know that she was female. Her race was white. She was married. So again, if I'm reading this code and didn't know, I know that she's married, so therefore I know that I need to pursue a marriage, potentially a marriage record. They do not give the name of the husband, of her spouse, which tells me right there that whoever is filling this out probably does not know her that well. because she was married and she had 4 children at this point, and her parents were also living at this time. Her husband was too. They do not give us a date of birth. So that's unfortunate if I'm looking for her date of birth. But again, this tells me this is somebody who doesn't know her that well. She was 45 years old. She was quite young. Her occupation, she was an inmate at the state hospital. So that's an unfortunate term that they use, but she was a patient there. They did say that she was born in Chatham County, which was consistent with what I knew, and it lists her parents, James Maddox, who was born in Chatham County, and Martha J. Lett, who was also born. But the interesting thing here, number 14, come all the way down here, guys, right here. The informant is the records of the state hospital. So that confirms this is somebody who's only pulling records from what they know, and they don't know necessarily a ton, and it tells us when it was filed. Now, some of the part of what I'm looking at here is I'm going to go back up here because she was in the hospital. One of the things that there's a little line here. Let me make this larger so you can see it. There we go. Can you see this line right here? It says length of residence in city or town where death occurred. And it says basically 6 days. So I know she was a patient there for only less than a week. We have her date of death, which is here, July 30th, 1927. And then we have the doctor's information. So this is the medical part of the death certificate, and this is important for us to know. It talks about that she, how long the doctor saw her for, and when he last saw her, and when she passed away. Interesting, the cause of death, exhaustion with psychosis type undetermined. Given the oral history, this would be something I would add to my research plan going forward, because I want to know, what does this really mean? And is there something else here that perhaps I need to pursue, such as oral history and those kinds of things? So I would actually put researching this particular diagnosis down as part of my research plan going forward. This number 77 here, guys, this is actually what they call an ICD code. And I actually I'll put a link in the description below on the video. I do have a blog post about what these numbers mean, but it is basically, if for some reason this were written and I couldn't read it, I could look up, each diagnosis has a code, and I could look it up and see what the code was, what that code stood for. And in this case, it stands for the exhaustion with the psychosis here. A little bit more information. We don't know much more about her. We know that there was no operation that preceded the death, so she didn't have surgery, which actually contradicts oral history. So I would want to look at that. There was no autopsy. And it gives us the doctor's name. So this is somebody that I would actually research. And I actually did research him to find out who he was and what was his specialty. He was a staff physician at the state hospital. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get more information on him. We know that she was buried in Lee County. We know the funeral home that took care of that. So that would here in Raleigh. So we would possibly be able to add that to a research plan to find a little more information about that if I needed to. And I know that took place in Raleigh. So there was some back and forth a little bit here. So as you can see, what I want you to take away here is I went line by line on this, guys, to see where she was from. What are my takeaways as a genealogy researcher researching Maddie Howard would be, knowing that she died in Raleigh, knowing the state hospital, I would definitely pursue learning a little bit more about that to see if I could potentially find out more from them, because the death took place so long ago. With that, now I can tell you, so one of the things to put on my research plan going forward would be explore possibility of requesting her records from the state hospital. And I would put that on my research list, my research plan going forward. And part of that being, I would need to also, as part of that, pursue the information regarding privacy on these types of records. I will tell you, in the state of North Carolina, I cannot get those records. I know she was married. So if I didn't know she was married, then I would definitely pursue her marriage record for that, because I know she was married her last name is Howard. Her parents' last name is Maddox. So that would tell me, her maiden name was Maddie Maddox. I would look for a Maddox Howard marriage record, either in Lee County or surrounding counties down there, since that seems to be where the family was focused, Chatham County and Lee County, which are side by side. Looking down here again, I would look. I've got her parents, so that's wonderful. Absolutely, I can take these. This gives me one more generation back. I know they were also born in Chatham County, if this information is accurate. So I would be able to research the family there, the Maddox family there in Chatham County. Understanding that the informant came from the records department of the state hospital, that tells me, yes, that's why there's so much scant information here. I find it very odd that her husband was not named, because he was still living, and they were still married and living, and he was taking care of the children. So yes, I thought that was interesting, but that kind of explains that piece of the puzzle. Other things that I would put onto my research plan, because I know when she died, and I would, if I did not know, if this were handwritten and I couldn't read it, I would investigate ICD codes for her. Because she's buried in Lee County, I would look for a burial site there. I would perhaps pursue funeral home records in Raleigh to see if I needed more information. If I couldn't find where she was buried, I might pursue the funeral home records there. So those are the things that I would put on my research plan that I pulled out of this death certificate to take forward in my research on this particular death certificate. Now, if you're enjoying learning about death certificates and the clues that you can pull from this death certificates to add to your genealogy research plan, be sure and hit that thumbs up button below, that like button, and let me know. Now, the information you can find on a death certificate is really pretty similar from state to state, although there will be minor differences. Let's take a quick look at one from the state of Texas. Okay, so I want to show you a Texas death certificate. I want to walk you through another example so that I can show you what I would pull out from a death certificate, the clues that I can find here that are going to lead me to more records. And ultimately, as genealogy researchers, of course, we want these records that we research to either A, answer our question, or B, lead us to further clues to help us grow that family tree. All right, so with that said, this is a Texas death certificate from Tarrant County, Texas. This would be Fort Worth, or the Fort Worth area, I should say. And so I'm actually looking at this on Ancestry.com, so full disclosure there. I'm going to enlarge it just a bit here for you. And, let me come down just a wee bit. Okay. So first thing you want to notice, always start at the top. Okay. We know that the name of the person right here is Mrs. Sue Atkins, or Ms. Sue Atkins. So we have her name there. The place of death is Tarrant County, Fort Worth, and we have an address. So it's very important that we read that little line under it. It says, if death occurred in the hospital or institution, give its name instead of the street number and ward. So by giving us the street number and the house actual address, we know where she actually died. Likely this would have been her home. It's certainly a good place to start. So we have 512 St. Louis Street, and it looks like that would be the 6th ward. So that's a really critical piece of information, and I'm going to put that into my research plan as I would pursue this Miss Sue Atkins to look for this address, look at city directories to see who else could have been in that home at that when she was there. All right, looking at the personal stuff, I go to the personal. So she was a female. She was white race. She is a widow. Okay, so if she was a widow, then I know that she was married at some point. So I can add that to my research plan, knowing I need to look for a marriage record if I do not know who she is, or if I did not know who the husband is, because I don't think he's actually listed on here. We have a date of birth. So we had that she was born in August. It looks like we'll call it the 28th, could be the 24th. We can calculate the year because we know that she was 61 years of age, 11 months, and 4 days. So we have a very specific age, which means we can then go ahead and determine her birth date. She was retired. So since she was retired, we know that we don't have any information as far as types of occupation that we could perhaps pursue records regarding. She was born in Texas. Okay, that gives us a place to start for that researching a birthplace. We know we don't need to look outside of the state. Her father was L.P. Wilson, so we don't know where he was born, and her mother was Sue Wilson. Now, this is interesting. In all likelihood, the person who is giving this information is the informant is Mr. H.F. Spillman. Well, Mr. H.F. Spillman is also listed as the undertaker. So he knew the family, so he knew a little bit about this family, but he didn't necessarily know all the tiny details like where the parents were born. So my guess is that Sue Atkins, this tells me her maiden name was Wilson. So I need to look for a marriage record with the name for a Sue Wilson and a gentleman with the surname of Atkins. And we don't know if this is would have been a first marriage or a second marriage, but it's a place to start. So on my research plan, I'm going to, in addition to putting in the directory and looking at this address that we had, I'm going to look for a marriage record between a Sue Wilson, and a gentleman with the surname of Atkins. So I would put that onto the research plan. Again, I don't really know where the family came from, so that doesn't really help me in pursuing perhaps other records for LP Wilson, but because I know who her father was, I would certainly, at that point, start pursuing him through the census records to see what else I might be able to find, and if I could find a maiden name for her mother's first name being Sue, or some variation of Sue, Susan, that type of thing. Okay, so as I mentioned, we looked at this informant. It was H.F. Spellman, the undertaker. So he is somebody who apparently knows the family, but how well, we're not exactly sure. Looking over here at the medical particulars, we know when she died, so we have a death date there. We know what she died of. She had carcinoma or cancer, and her doctor was E.T. Hall, and we have it down here as well. I always make note of this because if he was a long-term practicing physician in the community, if he was well known, it is possible his notes and own personal papers end up in a historical repository somewhere at the state level or the county level. So I would pursue and see if any of that is available to use in my research. It is not the first thing I go after, certainly, but if I wanted to know more, to see if I could learn a little bit more about this individual or the community in general, I would pursue those. Down here, they do have about the length of residence at the time of the place they died. So it looks like she had been at the place of death. This is difficult to read right here, but I think it's 8 years. She's been in the state for 61 years. Okay, and her usual address is that 512 St. Louis. Crucial and important information. It gives us a chance to go through those city directories. This is a 1910 death certificate, and if for the previous 8 years she has been at that particular residence. So that gives us a starting point in a really well-defined time period for when she was there. And I would go to those directories and see who else might be living in that household at that location. We know she's buried at Oakwood or Oakwood Cemetery there. So I would at this point also add that to my research plan, which would be to research that particular cemetery for her gravesite, and then certainly following the method that I've taught you in other videos on cemetery research would be who else is there? Who else is there for her that's around her? Is her husband there? Are their children there? Are her parents there? So I would definitely then at that point find that gravesite and then proceed with evaluating the gravesite. So that would be a major piece of the research plan as well. So there's quite a number of things to pull out, even from a death certificate that doesn't have everything filled out, like the place of birth for the parents, or even gives a husband's name. So it does give us still quite a bit of information that we can look through. The best tip that I can give you when it comes to analyzing your Ancestor's death certificate is really to take your time. Now, you probably heard this tip in the video I did on analyzing a birth certificate, because it's absolutely the best tip here as well. Take your time, go question by question, box by box, and look at each of those answers closely. What do those answers indicate? Are they pointing you to other records that you can then go ahead and put onto your genealogy research plan? Now, if you want to learn more about what you should include in your genealogy research plan, be sure and watch the video on your screen now, what your genealogy research is missing. You'll learn how to create a genealogy research plan so that you can be successful in your genealogy research as well.